Okay, I want to show you something. I just Googled the lungs of the world. So this is what you get when you Google lungs of the world. It shows a forest, and then it says the lungs of the planet are on fire. What's wrong with that, with these lungs of the planet?
If you're going to look up lungs of the world, you will find something like 500,000, or perhaps now it's several million, sites that use the expression. The Amazon, ladies and gentlemen, cognoscenti, the Amazon is not the lungs of the world and never has. The Amazon is nobody's lungs. The Amazon, like all other rainforests, does not bequeath any oxygen to the air. What about that for a revelation? I first said it in this book, in Microbe Power, that goes back, 1976 it came out. The atmosphere contains about 1/5 of oxygen. And that oxygen came from microbes that lived hundreds of millions of years ago and lay down their remains as fossils. In fact, they're half the rocks we see around us, like limestone, for example, that's a super abundant building material, all made of fossil microbes. And they left the oxygen behind in the air. Now, when trees grow in the sunshine, they produce oxygen. Yes, they do. But that's only part of the story. At night time, when the sun goes down, trees respire, same as you and I do, and they give out carbon dioxide. By the time a tree is fully grown, the average tree contains about a ton of carbon that's been laid down in its tissues. But what happens to the tree then? Although, because trees live a long time, we never think of this, trees die of old age eventually. Then they fall down and they rot away. And as they decompose, the microbes that cause the decomposition absorb oxygen and give out carbon dioxide as they break down the tissues of the dead tree. And so if you start with a germinating seed and end up with the tiniest speck of the dead tree when it's almost all rotted away, no oxygen at all is left in the atmosphere. If you go into the Amazon rainforest, where I've been very many times, tropical rainforest is remarkable. They open paths to show people through, but if you're not careful, they'll grow over again within a day or so. A maturing cocoa bean on a wild tree out in the jungle. Never seen one wild before. Some of the creepers are almost bizarre as they twist and turn and then fall away from the plant on which they originally grew. You'll see that there is actually no soil. That's surprising, isn't it? You'd think, well, it's a rainforest, it must be ankle deep in spongy peat. No, the temperature is so high that all the organic matter that falls down is immediately rotted away within days. You'll find a few leaves, but no actual soil. It's just sandy clay if you move the leaves aside with your foot. It's quite an extraordinary sight. And the Amazon rainforest, over its long life, doesn't give any oxygen at all to the air. It has long been known that if you burnt all the organic combustible material that exists, everything on the surface of the earth, all the oil, all the petrochemicals, all the coal, everything, it would make hardly any difference. The amount of oxygen in the air would go down by about 1/100th of where it is. You wouldn't notice the difference. So we don't burn rainforests if we want to keep pristine rainforests full of wildlife, that's true. But burning the rainforests is not stopping the production of oxygen, and it is not going to use up oxygen we need to breathe. Now, why are they burning the rainforests of the Amazon? Everybody says what a terrible thing it is. And it is a terrible thing. No one's going to argue with that. But the reason they're doing it is because they're copying us. I live in Cambridgeshire, surrounded by the fens. 300 or 400 years ago, the fens were a sort of temperate rainforest. It was yards deep, meters deep in peat. It was flooded with shallow water. There were swampy plants and trees. The local people who lived here used to catch the fish and catch the wildlife, and that is how they survived. And the whole life of the community was based on living in this swampy paradise. And what happened? Well, the capitalists from London came up, drove everybody out, killed them if they needed, got rid of all the wildlife. We used to have bears. We used to have wolves. We used to have beavers, which they've now begun to reintroduce. They killed off all the wildlife, drained all the swamp, and converted it to farmland. What the Brazilians are doing is wanting to copy our example and get rich the way we did. They say to us, you destroyed your rainforest areas in order to become world famous, in order to become dominant, in order to become wealthy, and in order to become successful. And we don't want to keep on living in a rainforest, even if we're surrounded by lovely sloths and jaguars. We don't want to live in a rainforest. We want to live in a nice house with air conditioning and a telly and a car. Why should we stay like the ancient traditional notion of the noble savage? Why should we stay living with bare-breasted women and little children running around in the mud? Why should we sit here in our dugout canoes simply so that tourists can come out and gawp at us, whilst you have developed yourselves by spoiling your landscape, eliminating the communities, and decimating the wildlife? So they're not quite as bad as we think they are. In many ways, all they're doing is following the example that we originally set.
Yeah, but they could learn from our mistakes. So they could avoid doing the same mistakes we did.
Well, clearly they need to, in the sense that this is such a valuable resource for tourism. Not that tourism at the moment scores very highly on anybody's shopping list. But leaving the forest as it is does give them the possibility of having enormous levels of tourism income. But I remember the first time that I went into some of the tribal villages up the Amazon, nearly 20 years ago. And there they were all in dugout canoes, the kind of canoes that we believe you had in the Stone Age. No, lots of countries around the tropics still have dugout canoes that they make and use every day. They were paddling about in dugout canoes. The women were all bare-breasted, and the children were running around and sometimes put on traditional tribal dress for ceremonies and for tribal dances. Last time I was there, quite a bit more recently, just a few years ago, the dugout canoes were all rotting in little creeks.
So the traditional dugout canoe lies filling with water and neglected.
They're driving around in little skips with outboard motors. All the kids had mobile phones. All the villages had television satellite aerials.
Alongside the aerial that brings them every TV channel in the world at the press of a button.
And the women were now wearing scruffy-looking T-shirts and showing off the sloths to the tourists. Already I've seen that lifestyle change from being a real lifestyle to a cameo. So it isn't so simple as to say they need to learn the lesson. We destroyed our world in order to become wealthy. They shouldn't destroy theirs, but at the same time they're becoming a kind of Disneyfied version of their old life just to please the tourists. And there is no merit in that alternative.